We know a lot about the epic stories of bravery that British and American soldiers endured throughout World War II. However, other countries also participated in the conflict and suffered the brutal consequences of the bloody battle against the Third Reich, and they did so in a manner as heroic and self-sacrificing as the great protagonists of the history books. In this video, we are going to tell you about the greatest feats of the armies that managed to resist and, in some cases, even defeat the troops of the Axis powers during World War II. There are few nations that have suffered as much from the consequences of the advance of the Third Reich as Poland, a country that had an army of brave heroes who participated in one of the most epic feats in modern warfare history. It all began on September 1, 1939, when Hitler's troops invaded Polish territory, starting a bloody battle, not only for the territory, but for racial reasons, since, according to Nazi doctrine, the Germans needed a vital space to develop their culture, and it was a natural right to destroy peoples like Polish Jews to get that territory. For more than a month, Hitler's troops attacked from the west, seizing cities at an overwhelming rate. Poland's army suffered considerable losses, reflecting the superiority of the German advance. Despite having the option of surrender on the table, the brave local troops continued to fight, losing between 16 and 22% of their total population as a result of that sacrifice, but that would only be the beginning of the horror. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union decided to join the invasion of Poland through the eastern part of the country, cornering the local soldiers between two armies. This situation was not accidental, but was part of a secretly agreed strategy between the governments of Hitler and Stalin. The entry of the Red Army accelerated the fall of Poland, which by October 6, 1939 had already yielded to the German and Soviet attack. Of the 80,000 militiamen that the country had, barely 19,000 survived, who after their withdrawal were sheltered by the British Army. The admirable thing about these soldiers is that they did not remain sheltered in Allied lands, but returned to fight with the Germans and the Soviets, not only motivated by love for their homeland, but also by the hunger for revenge they had against those armies that had overrun their homeland. Another army that had to suffer the attacks of Germany and the Soviet Union together was the Finnish. But in this case, the difference was too great and they could not put up forceful resistance. Where they could stand up like true heroes was in the Winter War of 1939, in which Finland faced the experienced troops of the Red Army. Stalin always thought that the occupation of Finland would be easy, but the defense of this country was much greater than expected, and the battle, which the president planned to end at the end of 1939, lasted until the beginning of 1940. In addition to the difference in the number of soldiers, since one army doubled the other, there was the quantity and quality of their weapons. Just to give an example, Finland had less than 1% of the main battle tanks that the Soviet Union had. The ammunition situation was just as dire, as reserves held cartridges, shells, and fuel only to last 19 to 60 days. The shortage of ammunition meant that the Finns could rarely afford counter-battery or saturation fire. The fighting lasted several weeks and, although Finland bravely resisted several offensives causing the Soviets 380,000 casualties, they could not avoid losing 70,000 men. Finally, on March 12, 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed, in which Finland agreed to cede 10% of its territory to Stalin, and the Soviet Union promised to end hostilities that same day. They may have lost this battle, but the Finnish soldiers showed true mettle and courage. If one speaks of mettle and courage, it is impossible not to highlight the Australian militias that fought in various fields throughout the Second World War, mainly facing the cruel Japanese army in the Pacific War. The advance of the Imperial Navy was given by conquering different islands and areas of Southeast Asia, even attacking and trying to seize some British and Australian colonies that were protected by their armies. These troops not only bravely defended their land, but also earned a reputation that other countries would envy. Many of the British and American fighters rated the Australians as the most prepared, brave and, above all, loyal soldiers they have ever seen fight. The greatest feat carried out by the Australian militia occurred on August 7, 1942, when, together with American troops, they landed in the Solomon Islands to prevent the construction of a Japanese base. The Empire of Japan was surprised by the actions of its enemies and immediately sent troops to annihilate them. During the next 6 months, one of the greatest battles of the Pacific War took place. The Australian death toll was 27,000 casualties, but by force of their fierceness and power, they managed to make the Japanese troops officially surrender on February 3, 1943. Little is said about the Indian Army, but it is a group of brave men who should be singled out, not only for their daring and bravery, but also because most of their fighters were volunteers. Despite its optional nature, the number of soldiers in the Indian Army amounted to 2.5 million men. Without the bravery of these troops, it is not known if the Allies would have achieved victory, since the Indian militias fought in terrible Japanese offensives such as the Yugo Operation or the Burma Campaign. With more than 87,000 soldiers lost during those combats, the Indian sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Another nation that has proven to be the cradle of brave soldiers is Canada. This country contributed to strengthening the armed ranks of the Allies in an astonishing number, providing 1.1 million soldiers to fight against the Axis. This is even more surprising when one considers that this number of combatants corresponded to 10% of the total population. The Canadians collaborated bravely in the Battle of the Atlantic, in which the hegemony of the maritime space of said ocean was disputed with Nazi Germany and Japan. Returning to European territory, in 1944 the Allies launched an operation to take the northern coasts through amphibious landings, from which they would advance on the territory controlled by National Socialism. That's right, we are talking about the mythical Normandy landing, in which Canadian troops played a stellar role. This army was in charge of Juno Beach, one of the most difficult beaches to conquer, where these brave men had to face mines, traps, machine guns and German artillery. Canadian soldiers did not hesitate and went to the front lines like heroes, achieving the feat of conquering more territory than the British Army in the first day. One army that proved to live up to its mythological traditions was that of Greece. When the Greco-Italian War broke out, the Axis as a whole had not yet been defeated once, and they certainly did not expect their first downfall to be with the modest Greek army. When Mussolini's military forces tried to dominate the area in 1940, local troops repelled them, fighting like true legendary heroes, making the Duce's fascist militias return to Albania in shame. Months later, the army of the Third Reich would enter the game, tipping the scales in favor of their Italian allies, but the Greeks were not going to give up without a fight. Despite being outnumbered, the soldiers defended Greece to the last consequences. Among the most moving passages, the Battle of Crete is remembered, in which the island civilians helped their warriors by attacking the Nazi soldiers with stones, sticks and spears, resisting faithful to their tradition. The most curious case of bravery in World War II is reserved for the daring recruits from Ireland. It was quite a controversial issue, since the country had officially declared itself neutral with respect to the war. It was for this reason that Irish civilians and soldiers who joined the British forces in fighting were at double risk. Not only that by going to battle they could die in the war, but in the lucky case they survived, they were likely to be charged with treason. At least 5,000 Irish soldiers joined the ranks of the British Army to fight the Axis, and the survivors who returned to their country were ousted by their army. Most died in poverty and were considered outcasts by the common Irish people who, in general, were in favor of the German regime. It wasn't until 2013 that the Irish government paid tribute to them, thanking them for their outstanding services in preventing Nazism from taking over Europe. If you like these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you soon for more military stories.